Hey guys, how's it going? Kripparrian here. Today I want to give you guys my review of all the Taverns of Time cards. Now that we've basically played with them for a while, we have a very informed opinion about most of them, and I think it's pretty interesting how we had all of these come up. I think there's been a lot of lessons learned from this, content patch for Arena. A lot of good lessons, a lot of bad lessons, and I wonder how many of these cards and their mechanics will be shown in the upcoming expansions, because honestly, I think one of the pitfalls that Hearthstone has is it does not have a PTR, a public test realm. It doesn't have a test site where masses can participate and give their feedback on what they experience. And this might actually be a very interesting way to introduce new mechanics and new type of cards to the game, have them tested before they actually release. So we'll find out if that happens to be the case in the next expansion release, maybe a couple expansion releases, because we do know that they work a couple expansion releases in advance. So today, let's get to it here. We're going to re-review the cards and mostly talk about how good they are and the lessons learned from playing them. Cromie ended up being one of possibly the most powerful card in the game in Arena. Even though I played all day, every single day since this Arena event happened, I never drafted Cromie. And actually, she's rare enough that I only faced her, I don't know, maybe a half dozen times, not that many. Every time I faced against her, I lost. It's just crazy. I feel like if you're going to have a limited time event like this one, you probably don't want to have a card with that extreme of a power level or a card that's that rare. What's the point of a limited time event if some of the cards you're just never going to play with, even if you play every single day, all day? Kind of want to experience some of these. So lesson learned here. I think if they are going to do limited time special events in Arena, they probably should not have legendary cards in the card pool because, well, they don't even really get played most of the time. Infinite Merlok, very interesting mechanic. Overall, it has been a bit of a letdown, but I think that can largely be attributed to the fact that it is Arena. In Arena, you do not want to have that much card draw. Card generation is almost always going to beat card draw, which means that people are not going to have that much card draw. It's not that common, and it serves the same purpose as card generation while being less powerful in Arena, at least. However, a card like this in Constructed, I think, would be very different, and just like one inclusion of this type of card would make Control Warlock and a few other control decks a lot stronger, just because they would never run out of steam. So I don't think it's a proper test for if they are making this mechanic in an upcoming expansion. It's probably not a proper test to do it in Arena, but it seems like, certainly with some certainty, that it's going to be pretty good there. Morazan is the other legendary card that we got to play with. Very interesting effect, very polarizing. Overall, it's a very strong card, but it fits a very specific niche. You want to play this in a deck that has a lot of tempo. You can unload your cards. You have a lot of direct damage. And you can only really play this card when you are ahead on the board. So it's a very situational card, but it is a very powerful, very interesting card. I actually like this quite a bit, even though it seems like this will be a soul-crushingly powerful game-ending card. Most of the time, it's not. Most of the time that I've seen it play, it created a situation where my opponent was in kind of a frantic state to make the best play, and often didn't. So the dynamic of the game was totally different, and I would very much like to see a card like this enter Constructed play. Possibility Seeker, in my opinion, is one of the most successful cards from the Taverns of Time set. Shuffling your hand into your deck is a very strong effect, but it never really felt like, I don't know how to say it, didn't really feel oppressive. It's just a very strong effect. Sometimes you'd play this on curve, and it wouldn't be anything more than a chill win Yeti. Because it's a dragon, yes, you have the dragon synergy, but you have the dragon slayers, which are also very common in Arena. So it's a very balanced card with a very powerful effect, but it didn't really take away from the game that we played. In fact, I think it enriched it with the fact that a lot of the time you would get some pretty bad hands, and getting to re-mulligan the hand mid-game game would be a very powerful effect that you wouldn't even automatically use. Sometimes you would have this card in your hand and you'd choose to play a worse turn just because you liked some of the other cards in your hand that you desperately wanted to keep for the following turns. And that level of decision making, in my opinion, is very good. I think this is my favorite card from Taverns of Time, and I'd love to see mechanics like these in constructed play. Maybe not quite as extreme, maybe just shuffling a few cards. I don't know, something to play around with, but I love it. Stasis Dragon ended up being a bit of a hit and a miss. It was largely a miss in decks that strived for tempo because a lot of the time just playing essentially nothing on turn 6, and if you're playing against a control deck, they could line up removal against you. However, it's extremely strong in classes that had a lot of board clears because, well, you'd clear your opponent's board and then you just play this after, so it would just slow down the pace of the game. They wouldn't play any big minions in the meantime, and then you just board clear them again because, well, they didn't play any big minions in the meantime. So it ended up being a very powerful mage card, while overall in most other classes not that powerful, but I wouldn't say it really broke the game in any way, so I very much appreciated Stasis Dragon most of the time I saw it. And again, with Dragon Slayers being very common in Arena, I didn't feel the card was too busted, so good card, good effect, interesting, a lot of strategy. Double thumbs up on that one. Temporal Anomoly, another very good card. I didn't like it quite as much as a standalone card. A lot of my decks had a few Temporal Anomalies, and it was okay. It's kind of the tricky thing. It's a 2-drop, but it's not really a 2-drop because if you keep this in your opening hand, you do not get the random spell, and the random spell is very important. So a lot of the time, you would just hope to draw into this card and otherwise play it off curve, making it on average not that powerful. However, if you had a few of the Possibility Seekers, the card I just mentioned a few ago, that mulligan your hand mid-game, what you would do is you would save your mid-game mulligan to the point where you draw a few of these from your deck, you'd get the spells, and you wouldn't play the Temporal Anomoly. You just leave it in your hand, so when you shuffle it back in your deck and you draw it a second time, it generates a second spell. So it's kind of like a new level of synergy that we hadn't experienced before, which is kind of like hand management, and it just felt really cool to play around with. Timebound Giant, in the other case, ended up being quite an oppressive card. It's just an extremely powerful Warlock card, particularly in Arena, because again, not that many people run card draw, but Warlock naturally has card draw, so it was a bit too powerful for Warlock. Fairly balanced for the other classes, but what made the card, in my opinion, oppressive is the mid-game mulligan. If you'd have a Possibility Seeker and you'd play it and you'd, move 7 cards back into your deck, draw 7 more cards, it would make your Timebound Giants come out way faster than they should. You would see sub turn 10 double 0 mana Timebound Giants in Arena, and in that game mode, it is almost impossible to recover from that. So it was actually a little bit oppressive, and because I really like the mulligan mechanics, the hand management mechanics introduced with the Taverns of Time content block, I think Timebound Giant is the problem, not the hand management. So my suggestions are, I know it's kind of like a thing with the Giants to make them cost less, but I think Giants would be a lot more interesting if they cost a base amount of mana and cost more with a certain condition. Now, that's pretty hard to do with Timebound Giant, but you can consider, like, I don't know, Mountain Giant. You could make it, like a 5 mana Giant, and then it could cost more mana based on how many cards you have in hand. So it wouldn't really reach that, like, 3 mana threshold, or in some of the other Giants, like Molten, the 0 mana threshold. That's what really starts breaking the game, and I think Blizzard moving forward can adjust the parameters on the Giants so that doesn't happen anymore. Timeline Witness, it seems like an interesting card. You basically get to choose one of 3 random cards from your decks. It improves your draws substantially. I did not like this card. I don't like this card because if you have a good deck, it upgrades your consistency to a point where you often can't lose anymore. Like if 1/3 of your deck is high quality removal and you're playing this and it goes uncontested, you're just going to pick high quality removal every single turn. You're going to keep this alive again and again and again, and your opponent's just going to get snowballed out of the game. What I don't like are cards that are played in the early game that are substantially better if you're winning than if you're losing. There's win more cards, and there's just snowball out of control win a hell of a lot more cards. And, this isn't the worst offender in that category, but it certainly belongs in that category. And cards that have that and also have an RNG effect, like this one, I think are very bad for the game. If your opponent misses their 2-drop and their 3-drop, and you're playing a good deck with lots of removal, you play this against them against an open board, it's very difficult to lose. To lose the game against that just because you happen to not draw your 2-drop, or you maybe happen to just go second and your 2-drop got killed by their 2-drop, that's just a really stupid way to decide the outcome of a game. And it's certainly not very fun, especially for the player on the receiving end of that beatdown. Timeway Wanderer, 5 mana, 6/3, adding a card to your deck, making it increased size is very interesting, more so for Constructed, where people actually do play the fatigue game if they choose, and it is a neutral card, so they could actually choose to do that. There is some randomness, but it's overall pretty interesting. I think this is one of the more balanced cards that we saw, and it allows you to combo out some pretty interesting things. So I had a lot of fun with this card. I think the power level is just low enough that it still placed it on an enjoyable level for me. Don't like extremely random cards. I don't like cards that, generate things at a discount in general, but being a 3 health 5-drop made it just fine. So props to Blizzard for that one. Wildlands Adventure, 5 mana, 5/5. Again, pretty bad stats. Adding a random card from the Hall of Fame to your hand. This is a bit hit or miss. Some of the cards, most of the cards in Hall of Fame are extremely good in any situation, but a lot of them, some of them at least, are combo-centric cards. So, if you're getting like an Ice Lance and you're playing a Druid, that's like, what the hell just happened? But if you're playing a Druid and you're ramped out and you get a Ragnaros off Wildlands Adventure, you just win the game. So I feel like the variance was a little bit too much on this one, but the card being a pretty bad base, 5 mana for 5/5, is typically not quite good enough even for Arena, by the way. So yeah, it's alright. I feel if we're gonna have cards with extreme levels of randomness and extreme, power level potentially, they might as well suck as a base. I think this card would be a lot more fun to play around if it was a slightly worse statted card, though. Maybe a 5 mana 4/5. Flash forward is starting with the class cards here. One of the new Druid Taverns of Time cards. This is awful. I didn't play against that many Druids, probably because, this is one of the cards they got. But out of the Druids that I did play, a few of them played this against me, and I think they lost every time. I kind of called this card for being absolute garbage. It turns out it's absolute garbage. There's not really much more to say about it. The other Druid card is Harbinger of Catastrophe. It is a card that can get a bit out of control, but it is a bit difficult to play being a 6-drop without taunt. And yes, Dragon's good, but Dragon Slayer's really bad. So, yeah, it's a bit hit or miss. The card is very interesting. Certainly would be a lot more powerful in Constructed, and I kind of would like to see a card like this in Constructed, honestly, because it doesn't really get its time to shine in Arena formats where people can't pick exactly the late game cards that they want. Cool card though. Very happy it was part of the set. For Hunter cards, we got Chronoshot, which is kind of like a targeted freeze trap. Chronoshot, it seems like a very interesting card, but because there's a very wide range of cards being played in Arena, it had an extreme hit or miss. I played a lot of chat drafts this month, which meant that I played a lot of Hunter. Thank you, chat. Thank you so much. I really love playing Hunter. I love Hunter. I fucking hate Hunter. Anyway, so I played a lot of this card. I have to say that... they play a 9-drop, you play Chronoshot, it's 3 mana silence removal, and it clogs their hand because you can't play an 11 mana card. Well, most of the time that doesn't happen. It's a good enough card that you pick it, and then you end up seeing like 1 or 2 more, and then you realize that your opponent's mostly playing early game stuff. So it's very difficult to use this card properly because as a hunter, more so than rogue, you need more proactive early game cards, which makes it higher risk to take cards like this. You know, while Rogue can take like a sap, Rogue gets a lot more tempo out of its hero power than Hunter does. So that difference makes it so a lot of the time you're going to be playing Hunter, your opponent still has like 15 HP, and your only cards in your hand are Chronoshots, and they are not going to do the trick. They're going to be like the worst cards in your deck at that point. So they just don't fit very well with the Hunter class, which probably is what makes the card pretty well designed. The fact that it looks completely insane in every class except probably Hunter, and it is a Hunter card, that's pretty good. Infinite Wolf is one of the other Infinite cards, certainly more interesting than the Merlok that we covered earlier. Overall, Infinite Wolf is actually a very good card. I thought it was good, and then, you know, I had some doubts when I first played it, but honestly, I was playing it wrong. Infinite Wolf, even though it looks like a minion, it's even a beast. Get ready. It's not actually a minion. This is not a minion. If you play this on the board and then don't attack into anything, you can hit your opponent in the face one time. Okay, so this is very literally a spell. This is a spell that gets shuffled into your deck and gets bigger and bigger each time. Now, the interesting thing about Infinite Wolf is that it can be very difficult to actually activate its effect in the late stages of the game. If your opponent only has large minions, even though the Infinite Wolf has Rush, it has to stay alive after it attacks something. So the first few Rush attacks are actually pretty important, but as a Hunter, you don't know if you're going to play the face game or the control game in the early game. So it's usually bad to keep an Infinite Wolf in your opening hand, though if you don't, it can be very difficult to make use of it later. That's the downside. The upside is, well, if you get it rolling, it's just constantly going to remove your opponent's minions, and it's extremely powerful, and you're not going to mill yourself, and with tracking as common as it is, you can just shuffle out Infinite Wolf out of your deck if you don't find it very good anymore in that game state. I think, though, I've seen Infinite Wolves past 10/10s a few times, and at that stage, it's no longer trading into other minions. I think if you get like an 11/11 Infinite Wolf, you put it on the board, you don't attack, and you see if your opponent can deal with it, because when it's that big, one hit to the face is going to end the game. Cavern Dreamer, I think, is the pinnacle of stupid and crap design on the cards that we've seen, and I'm so glad that we got an example as good as this one as the cards that are really bad for the game. So Cavern Dreamer is very much in the category that I just mentioned of extreme win more cards. So if you're winning, if your opponent has no minions and you play Cavern Dreamer, a large amount of the time, Cavern Dreamer will constantly generate spells that will protect itself from your opponent trying to kill it. So what ends up happening is, if you play a Cavern Dreamer, even on turn 1 with a coin, a lot of the time, even if you have nothing else in your hand that could save it, you're going to get a long string of answers that will eventually trade with most of your opponent's entire hand and draws up until the late stages of the game, where you have like an 8-card advantage, simply because you happen to get a Cavern Dreamer in your opening hand, and maybe your opponent happened to not draw a 2-drop. So the extreme win more cards are just super bullshit, and the fact that it costs 2 mana is just super bullshit, and the fact that it has a large scale of randomness, I mean, there's some extremely powerful low drop spells, and there's completely useless low. You can get Totemic Might off this guy, and trust me, we've all gotten that. So this card's super bad for the game. Basically, moving forward, these are the parameters for cards that I think basically ruin the game. Extreme win more cards that are early game cards with random effects. Randomness is fun. It is. But when randomness is attached to extremely powerful cards that are also win more cards, it literally destroys the gaming experience. And Cavern Dreamer has done that like none other. Consider the past interesting mage card, certainly preferable to normal draws like Arcane Intellect because you generate the cards, and a lot of cards in the past can't be played around. Your opponent doesn't know what to expect. So very interesting, very balanced card at 4 mana. I had a lot of fun playing with this. Blessing of Aeons. I saw this card played quite a bit. I might even make a video. I played someone who played like 4 of them. It didn't seem very good to me, but I think it's because when people play against Paladin, they know that their win condition is complete board control against the Paladin. If the Paladin starts getting minions, they start buffing them, they start playing weapons that buff them, they start giving each other Divine Shield, they start snowballing stats with this card. So yeah, I think in arena environment, this card was pretty mediocre just because it doesn't really help the Paladin's weaknesses. Bronze Brood Mother Paladin card. Nothing too flashy, but overall a good card. It's interesting to kind of keep track of draws. This is another card that I would consider hand management, but you're managing your opponent's hand. So keeping track of what your opponent is playing is very interesting. I think this card could be a little bit better. I think this could be a 5 mana 5/6 and still have the same effect. And in that case, it might actually be good enough to see some like constructed play if, you know, it's a card they want to replicate in a future expansion. What I really like about it is you keep track of that card. A 5 mana 5/6 is not that good to play, but you get the effect for free, which is very good. But, you know, when you're playing against someone like that, you can be like, okay, so he has 4 cards in hand, and like 2 he's had since the start of the game, 1 he just drew, and 1 is this card. So that gives you a more informed idea about what your opponent might have in his hand, and you know, naturally creating that strategy I think is very positive for the game. Reminiscence, haven't seen much out of this card. It's just totally random and overall on the weak side because it typically picks the low mana cards. I think it's worse than Thoughtsteal, so there's not really much to talk about. Ripple in Time, however, was a very strong addition from what I saw. It doesn't look like a particularly good card, but because of the flexibility, it is a very good card, at least in Arena. In Arena, if you get like a game-winning legendary, well, it's a game-winning card. It's a game-winning legendary. So if you just happen to get a gigantic, extremely powerful late-game minion, well, that's the one that you get. But if you just get some like 1-drop or 2-drop garbage with this card because it gives it Echo, that's also fine. You know, if you're playing this on like 10 mana and you get a 2-drop, playing 4 2-drops from one card is actually pretty close to the value of playing a 9 or a 10-drop. So the flexibility of this card makes it so it always delivers consistent value, and that makes it very powerful, at least in Arena, but I imagine in Constructed it's going to be a bit worse. Deja Vu, copy a spell, played this game, haven't seen much from that. I think in Arena, most rogue spells that people consider powerful in Constructed are not seen that frequently, so that's probably an issue with that, and a card like this would require further testing in Constructed formats. Thief of Futures, love this card. Even though it's not that powerful, the hand management effect seems very cool and very interesting. It's a double dip. You know, your opponent plays this, he knows your next card, and you don't know what card he took, so you're kind of like at a suspense. What's he going to do this turn? I don't know. Then you draw the card, then you know what card he has, and you can keep track of that. You can remember that. You can play around the fact that that might be one of very few cards in his hand later on in the game. You know what it is, you know the capabilities. It's you know, it looks like RNG, but really strategy dominates the power level of this card, and I love it. Master of Realities is once again extremely powerful win more card, super win more card, and extremely high RNG. However, it is not an early game card, so even though this card has been one of the scourges of Arena throughout this event, I think a card like this would not be particularly problematic in Constructed, because Constructed typically is a faster game mode, and a 6-drop being somewhat slow in Arena would mean that a 6-drop is ridiculously slow in most Constructed metas, so it's probably fine as a Constructed card, but I still would like to see fewer win more cards, and certainly cards that are a bit more balanced between the winning and losing states. Stasis Elemental, not much to say here, kind of annoying sometimes, but not too powerful. It's mostly decent because it is an elemental, and freezing is decent. Grasp the Future. We all thought this card would be quite strong, but the main setback with it is a lot of the time Warlocks in Arena actually run out of cards in their deck. The Warlock hero power certainly gets its mileage in Arena, and drawing additional cards is actually pretty bad. Grasp the Future, the only saving grace here is that we had the hand mid-game mulligan with the Probability Seeker, and we have the new Giants, which are particularly strong in Warlock, and this card just makes both of those a little bit better. As a result, this card's pretty good, but not as a standalone card, just because of the other cards that were introduced as part of the Taverns of Time set. Rift Warden looked really strong, but then we realized that everyone has dragons, so people pick Dragon Slayers extremely often. Then we realized that there's a lot of silenceable minions that you have to destroy in the late game, so cards like Polymorph and Hex ended up getting a large priority in the selection process. So basically everything was against this card, and it didn't really take off. Draconic Herald did take off, but Warrior didn't, so we saw very few of these. This card is extremely strong. You save it as your late drop, you add a card to your deck. A card like this would actually be extremely powerful in Constructed, because making your deck larger, particularly in the late game when you need to get that value, is very, very good. It again is hand management. I love this about Taverns of Time. You know, if your opponent's playing this against you, you might not know the minion that he got, but you know that card is not Brawl, it's not Warpath, it's unlikely to be like a Deathwing or something, so you can actually start going a bit wide. You know their next draw. If you don't think they have a board clear right now, and they play this, you can go wide on the board, and honestly the Warrior would know that, so maybe it's a strategic play to lead you to play into a wide board. So a lot of strategy goes into hand management cards, and this is one of the best ones. Fate Cleaver. Fate Cleaver seems like a good card, but my experience has been anything but it being a good card. It's just a 4-mana 4/2 weapon with honestly often a downside of removing all copies of it, because that affects both players. And the cards that have dominated this event have largely been neutral, and the cards that often dominate Arena have, well, they've actually been neutral as well. So, you know, you're like, oh, well, I'm going to kill his Stonehill Defender. And if he has another Stonehill Defender, well, I'm going to get great value. So you attack in, then you realize you had a Stonehill Defender, and now you no longer have a Stonehill Defender. It's, I guess, decent at beating up Paladin. If this is a constructed card, it would be a very good counter to Odd Paladin, because it would kill all the Silver Hand recruits currently on the board. But other than that, the effect is generally a downside, and yeah, even though it might not look like it. Overall, it's been an event with mixed feelings, but we've learned a lot, and I think most of the stuff that we've learned, most of our teachings are summarized in this video. So I'm curious what you guys think, if you've seen different angles on these cards, and I'm actually quite anxious to see how the next expansions will unfold and if they will use some of these mechanics. Let me know what you think, and I'll see you guys tomorrow.